Our next guest played college football until an injury prompted a life change. What followed was a stint in public service, where he worked as a prison guard, and then he returned to college to restart in financial services. Hear what he learned from each part of this journey next. I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, a podcast committed to revealing the richness and diversity of the world of investment by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Eddie Welch, who's an alternative asset specialist at Nuveen, a role he has held since April 2021. He previously worked as an associate at CIM Group, focused on real estate investing, and prior to that, and his degree at Ohio State University, worked in a wide variety of roles and played college football, all of which we will discuss here. Welcome, Eddie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for having me. Happy New Year to you. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, let's start with your career journey. You've certainly had a number of different roles. Were there any surprising turns in there, and where did it start?
Yeah. So to walk you through my background a little bit, I grew up in Southwest Ohio, Springboro, Ohio specifically. I grew up playing sports. Sports were kind of everything to me as a young man. I played football. That was my number one sport. And, I was lucky enough to earn a scholarship to a small school called Georgetown. That's just north of Lexington, Kentucky. Like most other kids that played sports growing up, I had dreams of playing professionally. But when I got to Georgetown, my freshman year, I suffered a knee injury and ended up having to take a little bit of time off. So I went back home to Dayton, Ohio. I decided that I wanted to transfer up to Ohio State. I tried to walk on to the team there, but I couldn't come back from the knee injuries. My body just wasn't the same. At that point, I actually ended up leaving school altogether. I just needed to figure out, what I was going to do with my life. So I moved in back with my family, back in Dayton. And, when I was younger, I thought that, maybe I'd be a police officer. My grandpa was a police officer, and that always seemed interesting to me. So being 20 years old and not being quite old enough to be a police officer at the time, I decided to get a job in a prison. So I worked as a state prison guard in Dayton, Ohio. I did that for 2 years. The first year and a half, I worked with low security men. And then a year and a half into that, they decided to transition the prison from minimum security men to maximum security women. So I did that for 2 years. And at the end of the 2 years, I decided that it was time to figure out what I wanted to do with my life long term. I always knew internally that I wanted to finish school. I had 2 years done. I really wanted to finish what I had already started. And so I had a friend that referred me to Verizon Wireless, and I got my first sales job, and I was able to save up some money. And I was able to go back to school at Ohio State at 27 years old. So 3 years going back to school, I majored in consumer science, which is just kind of a generic, business degree. I still wasn't really sure what I wanted to do moving forward. I met a gentleman named Richard at an Ohio State tailgate. We became friends over the next couple of years. I would see him during football season. We would text every now and then. And I didn't really know what he did, for work. He told me that he worked in real estate, and I thought he was just kind of a commercial real estate broker. But there was a night when we were all at a restaurant after a game. This was a couple of months before my graduation. And he was talking to a person who was sitting across from me at a table. And he was telling a story about a job that he had helped a family friend get, someone had just graduated from USC, and he had helped them get a job at his firm, and they turned the job down, and he couldn't believe that they turned it down. And I remember I looked at him and I said, Richard, I don't know, exactly what that is. I've never heard of it, but it sounds really interesting. I would love to do that. Would you be willing to refer me to that job? And he said, absolutely, send me your resume. And so I sent him my resume, and I had a couple of rounds of interviews. And, before I knew it, I was graduating 2 months later, selling all my stuff, packing up, what I could in my little car, and driving out to Arizona, a place where I didn't know anybody. I had never really been, but I knew I was moving out there for a great opportunity. So the firm that I worked with in Arizona was CIM Group. I started off there not really knowing anything about financial services. To be honest with you, when I took the job, I still didn't even completely understand it. But I started off as a scheduler. So it was my job to call financial advisors and to schedule meetings for both internal and external wholesalers. While doing that job, I had to study for the Series 7 and the Series 63. I ended up passing both of those about 7 months into doing the job and was promoted into an internal wholesaler role. From there, I worked with RIAs, independent broker dealers, and wirehouse firms covering New York City. About 2 years into that, someone from Nuveen reached out to me over LinkedIn and said, hey, we're looking to grow our alternatives business. It looks like your background would be a good fit for us. Would you be interested in taking a look at our team to see if it's something that you want to do? And I did that, and it ended up being a fantastic opportunity. So I moved from Arizona back to the Midwest, and today I'm located in Chicago. I've been with Nuveen for a couple of years now, and I work as an alternative investment specialist, pretty similar to my role at CIM, but I get to travel a little bit more and do a little bit more of my own meetings with advisors today. So that's a quick rundown of where I've been since I graduated high school.
Well, there's so many points and pivot points there that I'd love to pick up on. The first one is around playing sport at a high level. We've had quite a number of people on this podcast who've played sport at a high level, and many also have had a setback like yours, kind of a sudden setback, which puts an end to that dream and forces them to pivot and think about something else. What would you say you took away from the discipline, the rigor, and just the experience of playing sport at a high level, and also from a setback of that nature?
Yeah, I would say discipline is a really good place to start. Even as a young kid, I can remember taking athletics very, very seriously, right? I wanted to work out on a specific regimen. I had a specific diet that I did, and thinking about doing that as a 14, 15-year-old kid is a lot to take on, but I loved it, and I did it because I knew it would get me to where I wanted to be, right? You learn a lot about setting goals and making a plan to accomplish those goals. And then you learn a lot about adversity, right? And you start off playing. I remember I started playing football when I was in second grade, and I hated it, right? I hated getting hit. I hated playing in the cold. And I told my parents that I didn't want to play anymore. I didn't enjoy it. And they said, no, you're not quitting. This is going to be one of the first lessons in life that you really learn. You're going to stick out the season, and then we're going to talk about it next year, right? And so as I grew up, I got a lot better, and I started to grow, and eventually I became one of the best players on the team. But, for me, it taught me a lot about overcoming adversity, right? Setting your sights on something and then sticking to a plan, being a part of a team, right? Being a part of something that's bigger than just what you want to work towards. I typically played team sports. I also ran track, so you have some individual efforts there. But, every sport that I played was a team effort, right? So you learn how to work with other people. You learn how to kind of step aside when it's your time to step aside, and you learn how to sacrifice different things when you need to sacrifice. And you learn how to persevere. Once I got to college and realized that I wasn't going to be playing anymore, that was really difficult for me to get through. When I realized this is probably going to be the last time that I suit up and that I play and then I see my teammates again, it was difficult, right? But it helped me grow a lot.
And then moving to the time at the Dayton Correctional Facility, I don't think I knew that you'd worked with two different populations there. I suppose the low security men and the high security women could quite a difference, I'm sure, in many ways. What would you say you took away from that experience, dealing with people who are probably at a vulnerable, I'm sure, no doubt, at a very vulnerable and wounded state of their own lives? It can't have been an easy role. What was your experience there?
Yeah, when I think back to my time at the prison, it's not something that I would ever want to do again, but it's also something that I would never take back. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity that I had to be able to work there at such a young age. I didn't realize how much I was learning at the time because, again, I was young and I was certainly less mature than I am today. But you learn a lot about humility. You spend a minimum 40 hours a week in there, and truly that's more time that you get to spend with your own friends and family. You spend that time with the inmates. I spent my birthdays in there. I spent holidays in there, and throughout that time, you get to know them as people. And it really just showed me that, I was really fortunate to have the upbringing and the support system that I did as a young man. At the time, I didn't have necessarily that same perspective. But as I look back on it now, it was a very humbling experience, and it really shaped just the appreciation that I have for life today and the field that I am today. There's days that are hard. There's times that are hard. There's times that are frustrating. But I think having that background, it really makes me appreciative for what I have today. There's really not a day that I have today that's, as difficult as what I would have had back then.
And in terms of the inmates themselves, and you mentioned getting to know them as people, I would imagine also you got to see a lot of good in these people who are in prison for a reason, but I'm sure you got to appreciate some of the complexity of human nature.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of thinking back on some of the guys that I work with there, some of the guys that were inmates. I'm actually friends with a few of them on social media, and it's pretty cool to see how much they've grown. I mean, I knew these gentlemen's stories, right? And both of them had fathers that were locked up in prison for life. They were doing shorter sentences. One was doing 3 years, the other was doing 5. But I'm still friends with them on social media, and they're both dads today. They're fantastic dads that are both involved in their kids' lives. They're both entrepreneurs. He owns rental properties in Cincinnati, and the other one actually he has a candy truck. It's similar to an ice cream truck, but he specifically sells candy and other snacks. And so, I follow them on Instagram. They're always out promoting their business. They're always with their families, and it's really cool to see guys that I would talk to on a daily basis and to know where they've come from, how much they've overcome. But to see the success that they've been able to have since they've gotten out it's awesome. And I'm always cheering for them. And those are people that I'll always keep in touch with.
That's certainly extremely heartwarming even to hear about those experiences from a distance. And I'm sure your role in just humanizing their time in the correctional facility was very key to that. Just moving on, before we go on to your current role, just in going back to school at a later stage in life, more of as a mature student, how did that feel? How did you adjust? Did you just get on with it? Did you feel like a fish out of water in any way?
I very much felt like a fish out of water. I've been working full time for Verizon, 40 hours a week. And the nice thing about that is that you clock in, you clock out, and you don't really have a whole lot of homework or anything to think about outside of those hours. But going back to school, I had to learn how to be an adult and to really be on my own. I wasn't living with my parents anymore, so I didn't have that safety net. But 27, 28 years old, I was in classes with kids who were much younger than me, 18 and 19. And there was certainly a pretty big difference there. And then I also had to work. Right? There at times I was working. I think the most jobs that I had at any one point was 4 different jobs while going to school full time. So I had to be able to work. I had to be able to support myself. And then I had to be able to attend classes and do the best that I could there. So it was a lot to take on. And I would say that it was a really difficult experience. But again, I've had so many opportunities in my life that I'm so grateful for. And that was one of them. I think there are a lot of people that start school and end up having to leave for one reason or another. It could be financial. It could be a maturity thing. Maybe you're just not ready for school at that time. But it was something that I always wanted to do. And anytime I hear somebody who is a little bit older than the traditional age talking about going back to school, I tell them, do it. Absolutely do it. If you know internally that that's something that you want to do, don't worry about how old you are. I don't care if you're 30, 35, 40. If that's something that you want for yourself, do it. It's absolutely worth it. And you're going to feel, fantastic when you're done.
Great words of advice there. And now moving to your role in the investment industry, alternative asset specialist at a very large firm like Nuveen. You said you also came to that a bit later in life. Some would maybe go to it earlier in their maybe early 20s. Do you think the industry does a good job at making itself known as an industry, as an option, or accessible to young people?
So the industry is huge, right? And there's a lot of different career paths that you can go down. I think that, most kids that major in something like a business or a finance or an economics, they're familiar with investment roles or maybe even being a financial advisor. But most people that I've talked to have never heard of what I do, being a wholesaler, right? Being a consultant to those advisors. So I think the industry as a whole does a good job. There's always work to be done, but I would love to see a better job just in terms of what I do. I think the firm that I work for today, Nuveen, does a really good job of putting our name out there. But if you don't know that a field exists, if you've never heard of it, if you don't understand it, how can you really set your sights on something like that? And it's a fantastic field. You can have a really lucrative career. It's a people business. You get to work with some fantastic people. And honestly, I have fantastic work-life balance as well, right? There's not a lot of industries that give you all of those things. So I think there's work to be done. I'm excited to be a part of that. And, it's one of my goals to be able to get the name out there and to get the name out there in places where you wouldn't necessarily think that a lot of kids would have access to stuff like that.
And what do you enjoy about the investment industry? You mentioned starting out in real estate was something that's very tangible, just something that we can all kind of access from our own experience. What is it that you like now in an area which is quite broad, alternatives?
Yeah, I love real estate in general. I don't know why I've always been drawn to real estate. I think even if I didn't work in this specific field, I would be doing something with real estate, whether it's being an actual realtor or working with my own real estate investments. But I think that's it. It's the tangibility of it, right? Being able to talk about actual buildings. I consult on something called a real estate investment trust, right? So these are buildings that are located all over the country. And when people invest in our real estate investment trust, for example, if you live in a state like Florida or Texas, where we own a lot of properties, you can drive by an HEB grocery store and say, I own a piece of that grocery store, right? There's just something about that tangibility and being able to see those assets in your community that excite me. I'd say that's probably what I like about it the most.
And just in terms of the diversity of the industry, what has your experience been? And have you seen any changes, any shifts throughout the course of your being involved in it?
Yeah, that's another thing that I've seen grow tremendously. I remember my first day at Nuveen. On Mondays, we have a company-wide call that has our distribution team, say somewhere between 250 to 300 people on it. And I remember just scanning through all of the names and faces that were on that call, and I was blown away by the amount of diversity that I saw, both men and women and people of all different colors and races. And I was really proud to see that. That was my first day there. I felt a real sense of belonging just from day one. I do think that there's a ways to go. But again, that's another area where I'm excited to be a part of that and to have an opportunity to help with that.
And you said that you're trying to play your part, not only in the diversity piece, but also in making the industry more accessible, maybe lifting the veil for the next generation. How are you doing that? Do you look at mentorship? Do you help with recruiting?
Yeah, so I haven't done any actual help with recruiting, but that's something that I really want to get into. I want to be able to go back to my alma mater, Ohio State, and be able to speak to kids at the business school there. I'm actually going to be relocating to Los Angeles here in a couple of months. So once I get out there, where I'd really like to focus my time is working with kids that are junior high age and high school age, right? I think that if you were to ask most kids of that age, hey, what are some of the best career fields out there? You're going to hear doctor or lawyer or engineer. They just don't know that this field exists, right? And so again, how can you really set your sights on something and make that a goal for yourself if you don't know that it exists? So I think the way to truly increase diversity over the long term is by getting to speak with those people when they're younger, letting them know, hey, this field exists. It's a fantastic field, and people in this field want you here. They want people with diverse backgrounds, with different non-traditional stories to be here, because I think diversity is really what makes this a well-rounded and whole industry.
And when we first met, it was at a dinner, and we were discussing some of the mentors in your life and some of the key people. And some of the stories are truly extraordinary in terms of some of the people who've had an impression on you. Can you share one or two stories of who was influential throughout your life so far?
Yeah. I've got three that I'll share with you. I have to start with my grandparents. Both of them have passed away within the last 2 years. But my grandparents were a Black man, Black woman, both born in the 20s, both graduated from college. My grandfather was an Army lieutenant and then went to work on for the post office. So he always worked for the government. My grandmother was a career-long teacher. But, being born in the time that they were, I can only imagine the things that they saw. But I can truly say that I would not have the life that I have today. I wouldn't have any of the opportunities that I had today without them. So I feel like I owe them everything. The next person would be my friend Richard, who brought me into the business. He's been an amazing mentor. We work for different firms now, but we still talk weekly. He was willing to put his reputation on the line for me without me ever needing to prove anything to him. And that's something that I'm always going to take with me and try to do for others. And then third would be my current manager, Justin. I can say that I wouldn't be at Nuveen if it wasn't for him. And similar to Richard, he gave me an opportunity and he's made himself a mentor to me, and he's really shaping my career today.
And did any of these individuals or relatives give you any key wisdom or instill in you a creed or a motto that you still live by and live up to today?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of advice from them, but one thing that I've kept with me since my teenage years was something that my high school football coach used to say. My sophomore and junior year, we were horrible. I think we won maybe 5 or 6 games combined. And then my senior year, we were very good. We won 10 games and, went to the state playoffs and things like that. But after every game, he would say, nothing is ever as good as it seems, and nothing is ever as bad as it seems. Right. And I kept that with me. throughout my adult life. It's taught me to appreciate the good times and to really be in the moment, but also to keep in mind that life is hard and bad times will come. But, stick to the people that are close to you, stick to the people that will care about you. Those bad times will pass and things will get better. So it's really just taught me to keep sort of an even keel mindset throughout life. And I think that's really important when working really anywhere, but certainly in the corporate world. You're going to come up against adversity, but being able to keep that nice even keeled mindset is going to help you get through.
It's interesting that you use the words of a coach because, as I said, we have interviewed other guests who've played sport at a high level and they also quote their coaches. And I suppose I'm struck by how much coaches leave an impression on the lives that they touch. And there's a bit of a question that wasn't on the script, but I wanted to ask you, do you think it takes something special to be a coach? Because clearly they touch generations of lives.
I absolutely think it takes something special to be a coach, especially as you start to get a little bit higher up from high school to college, right? Because they spend a tremendous amount of time with their teams, right? And that's time that they're sacrificing from their family. And, for example, my football coach had sons that played football. And there were a lot of times when he would have to miss his son's game because he was coaching us, right? So there's all the obvious things, right? The leadership qualities and the knowledge and things like that. But there's also just a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice that goes into a role like that because it's something that you really have to have a passion for. It's going to take up a lot of your time. And there's going to be a lot of sacrifice on the family time that comes. So I thank my coach for all the time that he spent with us, for everything that he put into us. And he's somebody that I also still keep in touch with on social media. I hope that he does know how much of an impact that he's had on my life even today.
Really interesting. And looking back, given you've had so many twists and turns in your career, you've been in lots of different fields. Is there anything you know now that you wish you had known maybe as that young athlete, not knowing the course your life would take? Is there any wisdom that you wish you could share with him?
Yeah, I would say to try to enjoy the struggle a little bit more. Things can get pretty frustrating when you're at a place and you feel like you're in a hole that you may never get out of. The times when I was working in that prison, going back to school was really just a dream. And there are people in my life who I think that if I would have asked, hey, you think I should stay at the prison or should I try going back to school? They probably would have just told me to stay at the prison. It was a government job with good benefits and I could have retired after 25 years. But I knew that there was more for me. And I think that if I could go back and talk to my younger self, I would say, really be in the moment here and enjoy this time. It's difficult, but it's going to make you the man that you're going to be for the rest of your life.
Well, thank you so much, Eddie. From the moment I met you, you have struck me as a breath of fresh air in our industry. And this conversation has really just confirmed that for me. From your experience in sport to your time in public service to all of the learnings you've taken from that now into your role in finance and your commitment to passing on the goodwill that was shown to you. I feel so privileged to have you here as a guest on the podcast and can't wait to see what lies ahead for you.
Thank you, Ethan. I really appreciate you having me.
I'm Ethan Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring investors and their personal journeys, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.